Baboon, didn't this happen in the 80s? Well, it ended in the 90s, so it counts. Shut up. Alright, soldiers, listen up. Today, we will be going into my favorite type of battle. The kind where the enemy does not stand a single chance at all. We will be invading a small Latin American country to remove its crazy voodoo dictator. And before you ask, no, we did not declare war. We're just kinda doing this. Now, yes, some of you will die. But fear not, because all of your blood, sweat, and tears will be completely forgotten about in under a year because of a cooler war, and will only be remembered as a level in Call of Duty that most kids don't even know was based on real events. Any questions? Yeah, why? Why? Well, for that, we have to start at the start of sailing in the Western Hemisphere. The Americas are made of two parts, widely known as Uppy and Downy America. For hundreds of years, there was no way to sail from one side to the other without going all the way around. So in the 1800s, some French guy thought, Monsieur, wouldn't it be cool if we just did not have to do that? So stupid. So they tried to build a canal through this thin little area of Colombia known as Panama. And then everyone died and they gave up. So America came in, thinking they could build the canal better than any froggy could, but Colombia said no. So Teddy Roosevelt sailed gunboats down to Colombia, said actually Panama's a free country now, so shove it up your pagoda, and built the canal anyways. God bless democracy. From that point on, America and Panama were good friends, and even into the 70s, America agreed to give Panama full rights to the canal eventually. But unfortunately, Panama was a country in Latin America during the Cold War, and anyone familiar with US history knows what happens next. A CIA-backed dictator came in and ruined everything. Manuel Antonio Noriega was a prominent Panamanian military officer at the time. He rose the ranks by blackmailing the enemies of Panama's dictator, and through either dumb luck, gross incompetence, or black magic, he'd become the chief of military intelligence. This was great for him, as he'd also been a paid informant and asset of the CIA for decades. Now, America was real worried about this communism mumbo-jumbo spreading to the Americas, so the more anti-communist strongmen they could find, the better. Noriega was a good friend of the leader of Panama, until he died mysteriously in a plane crash that had nothing to do with Noriega or the CIA, though it did allow him to consolidate power and become the de facto ruler of Panama in '81. Just a total coincidence. Noriega helped support a bunch of right-wing rebel groups in the area and combat the drug trade, which was great for the US, who turned Panama into a hub for trafficking weapons, intel, and money. He, like other US-backed dictators, was just another prized asset of American foreign policy. Just a silly little guy in a silly little country. But soon, it became clear that Noriega wasn't really like the rest. Noriega was a bit of a character. Think a dumber Far Cry villain come to life. How so? Well, reportedly, he wore red underwear to ward off the, quote, evil eye, whatever that means. The man was a womanizing, egotistical alcoholic who was legendarily repulsive. He was known as cara de piña, or pineapple face, due to his complexion, which he of course hated. He was notably full of himself and cocky, telling reporters that he'd want Clint Eastwood to play him in a movie because he was very macho and didn't take shit from anyone. It was later discovered that he was involved in literal voodoo black magic, having two Brazilian witches fly up to Panama to help him practice multiple times. As I said, quite the character. And the CIA soon realized this too. As it turns out, Noriega wasn't really under their control. He didn't actually have any real political ideology apart from Panama is good, and wasn't all that anti-communist. Instead, he was kinda just pro making mad stacks. Noriega was the type of guy to try to play both sides off of each other like a movie, except he wasn't very good at it. It was believed that Noriega was selling himself to multiple intelligence organizations. He allowed basically any country to operate in Panama. Libya, Israel, even outspoken US enemies like Russia and Cuba. But by far, his most damaging associations were with Pablo Escobar's Medellin cartel, because of course he was involved with Escobar. The cartel was using Panama as a staging ground to run drugs to the US, with Noriega just raking in the profits. Along with laundering drug money, the CIA found evidence that he was selling restricted US tech and info. Despite Noriega clearly playing them like a fiddle, the US looked the other way for basically all these crimes. But they were getting pretty sick of it. Only they should be allowed to traffic guns, money, and drugs through Panama. Hey look, it's Panamanian revolutionary Hugo Spadafora. He's back from fighting in Nicaragua and now says Noriega's ass is grass. He's a charismatic, handsome doctor from a prominent family who's fought colonialism and dictators before. He's an inspiring optimist who's gonna fight back against Noriega's regime, and he's gonna topple this. Oh my god, he's dead. The brutal beheading of Noriega's main rival in '85 turned the people of Panama against him. His defense of "I wasn't even there" didn't convince many Panamanians, and some began openly protesting his rule. In response to the turn, Noriega created the Dignity Battalions, a group of dignified gentlemen who chased around these unarmed protesters with machetes. With no one to stop him and the backing of the CIA, Noriega thought he could do whatever he wanted. But times were changing. The Cold War was slowly ending, and with it, Noriega's usefulness. The US realized that having an insanely corrupt alcoholic drug lord ruling over one of the most important trade routes in the world actually wasn't a good idea. And after the murder, the US began stopping its assistance. Soon after, Noriega would be indicted by a US grand jury on drug trafficking charges. He was now an enemy of America, but President Reagan offered him a deal. His vice president, George H.W. Bush, was running for president, and Noriega had kind of become an embarrassment for him. Bush's war on drugs message rang a bit hollow when he had met the druggy dictator on multiple occasions.
This is crack cocaine.
So Reagan offered to drop the charges if Noriega left Panama. But of course, Noriega was having none of it. A broken-hearted Noriega knew he was no longer BFFs with the USA, and like any spiteful ex, decided to make that everyone else's problem. There were still a lot of US citizens living in Panama on military bases and around the canal, so Noriega decided to make their lives as hellish and annoying as possible. He would constantly harass the US military and citizens there, with a pro-Noriega mob attacking the US embassy. By '89, America had ended all assistance to Panama and replaced their Southern Command General with a more aggressive one. But Noriega had no time to deal with silly things like that. It was election season. A true lover of democracy, Noriega still allowed presidential elections, so long as he picked the candidate and rigged it for them, of course. Yet this year, there was just one problem. Panamanians still hated his guts, and his candidate lost so bad that he couldn't even rig it. Do you know how bad you have to lose to not win a rigged election? But Noriega wouldn't let a silly thing like the will of the people get in the way. He threw a hissy fit and declared nuh-uh, nullified the election, and sent a mob to go beat up the winners in front of the international media, just for good measure. In response, now President Bush increased US troops in the area. With the country falling apart, the US becoming more aggressive, and democracy officially dead, some officers decided, now's a good time as ever to overthrow the government. Lucky for Noriega, he was able to defeat the attempted coup. But after this, he basically went ballistic. He of course believed that the Americans were behind it, which I mean, yeah, probably, but who knows. In a speech, he waved a machete over his head and dared the US to come after him. He appeared before the National Assembly and convinced them to name him Maximum Leader for some reason, which is an embarrassingly bad attempt at a cool title. I would have gone with the Panamanian Punisher myself. He also convinced them to declare that a state of war existed between the United States and Panama. Tensions were at a breaking point. The US continued to complain about human rights abuses and harassment. Noriega continued to harass. And just days after the declaration, an unarmed US Marine in civilian clothes was ambushed and killed by Panamanian soldiers. This was the final straw. On December 17th, Bush sent 11,000 more troops to the area and authorized Operation Just Cause, the invasion of Panama. The invasion had three main goals: protect Americans, restore democracy, and capture Noriega. The US now had over 24,000 troops in Panama, the largest deployment since Vietnam. And just past midnight on December 20th, US forces attacked. Hundreds of aircraft flew over Panama, dropping bombs and paratroopers. Landing craft brought even more special forces. Quickly, strategic airfields and bridges were captured, army barracks were attacked, and Noriega's houses secured. Navy SEALs destroyed destroyed his private jet, preventing escape but taking casualties. Before long, his headquarters was captured, and many of the outnumbered Panamanians surrendered. But where was Noriega? Joined by Navy SEALs, operators Alex Mason and Frank Woods captured Noriega hiding in a motel, when suddenly they were told by their trusted commander that they had to bring him to a prisoner exchange. But it turns out the other prisoner was actually... Oh wait, no, that's the plot of Noriega's mission in Black Ops 2. So if that's not what happened, what was Noriega actually doing when the invasion began? Why, banging prostitutes, of course. Noriega decided to ignore reports that the US was definitely about to invade and decided to go get hammered with hookers. In the middle of turning some Panama into a canal, an AC-130 gunship rocked the room. When Noriega stepped outside, he saw hundreds of US paratroopers dropping all around him. He and his entourage fled in a car and drove right up to an American roadblock before realizing they should probably drive the other way, making a narrow escape. US forces quickly secured Noriega's houses, but instead of the dictator, troops found tens of thousands of dollars, an extensive porno collection, religious altars, one of which was decorated with human organs, other evidence of witchcraft, pictures of Hitler, and 50 kilos of white powder. Though turns out the powder was just flour, meaning Noriega was either really into baking or Pablo Escobar was doing the cartel equivalent of selling teenagers oregano. Noriega continued to evade troops for the next 4 days, with the US worried that he would retreat to the mountains to start a long guerrilla war. $1 million bounty was even put out on him. In reality, Noriega wasn't planning anything cool like that, instead at one point hiding in his secretary's apartment. There, her flamboyant lounge singer husband drove everybody insane, to the point where one of Noriega's guards decided to rat him out because he couldn't stand it. But when he found US troops to give him the deets, none of them spoke Spanish, so they just arrested him. But Noriega also thought it was time to find somewhere better. He decided to call a papal nuncature, basically a Vatican embassy, to ask for refuge. They agreed to take him in, hoping it would stop the bloodshed. He asked them to pick him up from his super secret rendezvous point, a local Dairy Queen, and he was brought to the embassy. US troops quickly surrounded the embassy, and negotiators began talks with the Vatican. The staff of the embassy was bound by Christian morals not to kick him out, but they sure weren't happy he was there. They sent him to a dingy room with no AC, refused to give the alcoholic Noriega liquor, and basically just tried to ignore him. US forces, annoyed at the whole situation, decided that waiting was cringe and boring. So instead, they began blasting rock music like Voodoo Child in Panama at insane volume, since Noriega reportedly hated rock.
Good morning, Panama!
But Noriega claimed he couldn't even hear the music, which definitely isn't true since it kept the rest of the staff awake and very annoyed. Crowds began to gather, calling for his death, sticking pineapples on skewers, waving them around while shouting "pineapple face." After days of this, Noriega realized he dug himself a hole deeper than the canal. He finally agreed to leave and surrendered himself to the US. Noriega was flown to Miami, where he was convicted of drug trafficking, racketeering, and money laundering, and sentenced to 40 years. He told journalists at the time that he regretted nothing, though he later admitted that it wasn't something I'd do again. Very introspective of him. The entire invasion took less than 2 months. 23 US soldiers were killed, along with 200 to 300 Panamanian soldiers and over 300 civilians. The world, of course, was pretty pissed, with the UN and Organization of American States both condemning the invasion, though polls showed that most Panamanians supported it, as it helped maintain their democracy.
Though obviously not everyone.
Only a year later, the US would invade Iraq for the first time, with officials calling Panama a great training experience. Apart from that ominous statement, to the public, Operation Just Cause was forgotten as quickly as it happened. While many enemies of the United States have later been seen as tragic, charismatic heroes like Pancho Villa and Che Guevara, Manuel Noriega is not one of them. He was just an asshole who didn't stand for anything and lost immediately. And he would continue to lose, as he was again seen in 2012 in Call of Duty Black Ops 2, where he plays a major part in one of the most shocking scenes in video game history.
This is not a deal. Call your boss.
Noriega, who was still alive at this point, sued the makers of the game Activision for how he was portrayed, saying that it hurt his reputation, which I'm sure was just stellar at the time. I don't think I need to tell you, this went nowhere. Activision's lawyer, Rudy Giuliani, yes, that one, said that it was a victory for works of art across entertainment. And now, media can continue to depict historical characters without fear of reprisal. And that, kids, is the story of how Rudy Giuliani saved video games. Yep, that's what this whole video was actually about. Like, subscribe, bye-bye. Panama, Panama.